due to the Easter holidays. We are back today with new developments and happenings on the African continent and hope to serve you for the rest of the year. For those joining us for the first time, this panel discussion is part of our series on assessing U.S. strategic policies and relations under the 3Ds: diplomacy, defense, and development towards sub-Saharan Africa. We've been focusing our attention at the 20 upcoming elections on the African continent. We've been able to look at Senegal, South Africa, Rwanda, South Sudan, and today we are taking a look at Guinea. Today's virtual panel discussion is on the topic U.S. Adapt Initiative, the Tenuous transition and election situation in Guinea Conakry. So let's look at the meaning of the word ADAPT. It's an acronym for Africa Democratic and Political Transitions. It's a political and technical support that the U.S. government initiated for Africa. We will delve into ADAPT in the course of our discussions. Okay, so Guinea presents a unique situation for discussion because on September 5, 2021, President of Guinea, Alpha Conde, was captured by the country's army in a coup d'etat led by Colonel Mamadi Doumbouya. Discussions on Guinea, given its coup background, can be tricky, given that there's a 24-month transitional period agreement between the National Transition Council, CNT, led by the transitional president, Doumbouya, and ECOWAS to return the country back to civilian and constitutional rule. Let's not forget, today's discussion on the U.S. ADAPT Initiative, Tenuous Transitions and Election Situation in Ghana, are a continuation of Sankofa African series on U.S. government strategy towards sub-Saharan Africa, as announced by the Biden administration in August 2022. We've been focusing our attention on United States government strategic objective of fostering openness and open society and delivering democratic and security dividends in sub-Saharan Africa. This U.S. strategic objective will be analyzed within the context of the AU roadmap of silencing the guns 2030 by analyzing the challenges of the National Transition Council in spearheading the country through a peaceful civilian democratic transition in the post-coup period and Alpha Conde era. Given the nature of Guinea's tenuous transition and election situation and the interest of the United States in the Sahel region and its ADAPT initiatives, and the interest of other regional groupings, CSOs, intergovernmental and non-governmental organizations in the transition to civilian constitutional government, as a rotational host for today's program, I did reach out to ECOWAS head office in Abuja, Lagos, and the National Transitional Council for comment on the scheduled programming. I also communicated via telephone and email with the Guinean ambassador office in Washington, D.C., and also extended an invitation to the ambassador herself or her representative to join us. My last communication with the ambassador's office was yesterday, Thursday, April 4, 2024, and I've still not had any official response about their willingness to participate. Just put it on records for our panelists to know that. The Guinea tenuous transition and election situation, just like the South Sudan election situation, is complex, very exhaustive, sensitive, and unique, given recent coup d'etats which have rocked the West African sub-region. We see situation in Niger, Mali, and Burkina Faso, and especially Niger, Mali, and Burkina Faso request to pull out of ECOWAS, and most importantly, U.S. counterterrorism operations in the Sahel, which has witnessed a setback in recent times due to Niger junta regime's sudden announcement that it has terminated its military agreement with the U.S. with immediate effect. However, Guinea's case is a little bit different, since it did not toe the line of Niger, Mali, and Burkina Faso in terms of forming an alliance to withdraw from ECOWAS. So, however, we will try as much as possible to get our panelists to discuss the topic. To our listeners and viewers in the various social media platforms around the world, the Sankofa African webinar is anchored on myriad of perspectives. So there may be differences of opinions from our guests based on their perspective, knowledge, and experiences. The difference in opinion does not necessarily mean perspectives and thoughts shared are wrong, but reflect a divergence of ideas to address security challenges facing the African continent. The Sankofa African Webinars relies on narrative for its discussions programs. Narratives are an integral part of African societies, and in our discussion, we utilize them based on research findings, policy positions, and realities prevailing in various countries. The narratives help our panelists to present their perspective independently, and which sometimes may diverge from official government or organization policy positions. So today, we are honored to have 4 panelists. We have Dr. Benjamin Mashra, who is an assistant professor of political science, who is joining us from Juba, also a co-host of the Sankofa African webinar. We have Ms. Madeleine Delture. Did I get your name right? All right. He's a stabilization advisor, conflict stabilization and operations, CSO Bureau in the United States Department of State. She is joining us all the way from Conakry, Guinea. Thank you for joining us. Then we'll be joined by Mr. Paul Komovi Sameku Amegapo, who is a political and governance expert, the CEO of the Institute of Tabama in Lome, Togo, and also a former NDI Institute and National Democratic Institute, NDI resident director in Conakry, Guinea. He's actually in a meeting, so he's going to join us a little bit late during the course of our discussions. And also, we are lucky to have Lieutenant Tad Parker, who is a senior security sector consultant, and also, okay, let's end it over there. He has been a partner for this, for the Sankofa African webinar. So we thank him for all his expertise, experience, and knowledge about the African continent. So, gentlemen and ladies, you are all welcome to the Sankofa African webinar. Okay, so before we welcome your opening remarks, we want our viewers and listeners around the African continent and diaspora to note that the Sankofa African webinar is organized and brought to you by Kanketi of Beden Associate Consulting in collaboration with Budget IT. So we're going to have a promotional video for probably like a minute and 30 seconds. Then we'll get back to our welcome address from our panelists. So, Nancy, if you are, can you play the promotional video briefly? Thank you very much, Nancy and your team all the way in Ghana. So I'm going to give you the opportunity for you to give your welcome address, but I want to make a brief statement. Since our last program on April 22nd, 2024, an important development has taken place with respect to the election situation in Senegal. We had the opportunity to discuss the political and constitutional crisis in Senegal after President Macky Sall postponement of the elections. Since then, the election has taken place with little or no violence. The new president, Bassirou Faye, was sworn in on April 2, 2024. That was probably 2-3 days ago. And the country celebrated its 64th Independence Day 2 days later. Now, when you are trying to give us your opening address, I want you to take into consideration a kind of event in Senegal by looking into your crystal ball, whether the remaining upcoming elections in some of these African countries are going to follow the path that Senegal has taken. Because Senegal has taken a positive path toward democratic consolidation. So I want you to take into consideration what happened in Senegal as maybe a justification as to what is going to happen in the remaining coming elections on the African continent. So let's start with you first, Dr. Machar. I want you to take into consideration our discussion about Senegal, how things have turned up, and what you see going forward in terms of democratic consolidation on the African continent. Let's start with you, Dr. Machar.
Thank you. Thank you, Akwe. And it's very, very important that you have tied this last leg of our series on elections about the positive outcome that just took place in the Senegal. I just want to say hello to all of you. Yes, it's very, very important to understand the role of political history, state formations, and really accumulation of democratic governance in a society. So indeed, what we have seen in the Senegal is what we have always been calling in political science, the really democratization of a society rather than of the states. And you saw what was going on in the Senegal. The ruling party was trying to cling to the states, using the state apparatus, like what we are seeing in the United States, to weaponize the Justice Department to go after their own political opponents. Okay? But it never worked because the society has actually been democratized, not the states. And when the state want to reclaim back the society want to reclaim back the states, it used the peaceful elections, and the outcomes was very surprising. Can you imagine those who were actually in jail? Osman Sanko, who was actually supposed to be the president, was the one that was charged and was put in jail, and his other comrades who now becomes the president was not charged but was jailed. But he was not the bigger threat. They let him out, and Sanko actually blessed him so that he took over. And 10 days later on, he became the president. And see what is happening. Sanko is now the prime minister. So you are seeing the democratization that we have been telling our Western counterpart. No, if you want to do democratization in Africa, follow the rubric that you had actually followed. Democratize the society, education, so that you actually educate people about the right and responsibility. As much as there are rights, there are also responsibilities. Okay? So in Africa, it's just only right. There are no responsibilities of a citizenry that are emphasized. But because of the gain of peace and stability in Senegal since 1960s until now, you are seeing the differences. So the democratization process that is going on in Senegal is an interesting experiment. And like what we see in Kenya always, whereby it is more of ethnic tension, because in Kenya, there is no one single majority ethnic group. But in the Senegal, the Wolof, of course, are the majority. So you could just see their community.
But I want to know the crystal ball looking forward in terms of the upcoming elections.
Yes.
What do you
see I'm coming to that. Okay. I'm coming to that. So what I'm seeing in Guinea Conakry, remember in historical context, Guinea is also a very, very historical society, like Ghanaians, okay? Like Ghana. What we have seen long time ago in that. Okay.
Yeah.
Yes. Can you let someone come in?
Okay. Let's go to Madam. Let's hear from you. Can you look into the picture more in terms of what happened in Guinea and consider that into what will happen in the other African countries going forward?
Yes, I'm sorry. There's a bit of delay with my computer here, so forgive me. But
Sure.
Thank you very much, Ben, for giving me the opportunity to speak, and thank you for everyone for joining us today for the important discussion, and to the organizers, to Sankofa African Affairs webinars for organizing this. As Ben mentioned, I'm Madeline Velturo. I'm a stabilization advisor with the U.S. State Department's Conflict and Stabilization Operations Bureau, and I currently work out of the U.S. Embassy in Conakry, focused on the implementation of our ADAPT initiative in Guinea. There's a big question you asked me, Ben, about that I wasn't necessarily prepared to talk about on predictions for the future. I can't speak to the U.S. government's thoughts on the predictions of the future, but I can say that, from my point of view, one of the reasons Guinea was chosen to pilot this new initiative, this African Democracy and Political Transitions Initiative, is because of how strongly the Guinean people demonstrate kind of this determination, fortitude, and resilience in fighting for democracy in their own country, which makes them, the Guinean people, ideal partners for this type of initiative, which I could explain more about what we're doing in Guinea as the conversation moves on. And so I do think that what my colleague, Professor Machar, said is very true, that the ADAPT initiative is working really to work with the Guinean people and to strengthen their capacity to demand and engage with democratic institutions from their government in that bottom-up approach. And I guess, I don't know if it's a crystal ball, but I am hopeful that that approach will yield the results as Professor Machar mentions. It has yielded positive results in the past in the fortification of democratic principles in many countries in Africa. I can stop there and respond to additional questions as well.
All right. Thank you very much. Now let's come to Lieutenant Korka. You were on the program when we discussing the political and constitutional crisis in Guinea, almost I think like a month and a half ago. Looking at what has happened now, where we had a swearing in on the 2nd, and 2 days later we have the independence. Looking at what happened in Senegal, and looking into your crystal ball in terms of what is going to happen in the other African countries. We discussed what happened in South Africa. We look at what happened in Rwanda. We look at what happened in South Sudan. What do you think what happened in Guinea? Would that be a reflection of what is about to happen in the other African countries in terms of development of civil society organizations?
Good afternoon, good evening to the viewers. Welcome to this series, and hello to Madeline out in Conakry, and also to Benjamin Machar out in South Sudan and the others. Thank you for the opportunity to comment on this first leadoff question. I appreciate you adding it because that is a good positive news story and a positive outcome to what had appeared of backsliding. Now, and so I think we're all grateful for the outcome. Having the personal experience of living and working in Dakar during the transition back in 2000. And that was again the first one example of a positive political outcome. So as we have said before, that they had. That happened to be the first time that the political power transferred between political parties So that was new for them at the time. And so we fast forward from 2000 to 2023, 24, and now they are there again. What I can say, having been on the ground in 2000 and for compare and contrast to other countries, what I can affirm is one aspect of the electoral process, specifically in Senegal in 2000. The armed forces of Senegal, from the top leader on down to a soldier, affirmed their status of being apolitical. And so, in my estimation, that went a long way to stabilizing democracy in Senegal. And I think that culture continues to today. And I think that's a big difference with everyone else, is that you don't see the military a resolute affirmation of their apolitical and staying out of it. And even most recently in 2023, that you did not hear much about the Senegal armed forces interfering in this national election. And so, compare and contrast, I would start there in terms of, what countries may or may not, have a good stead. You have many countries where the military has been disruptive. In contrast to Senegal, the military simply has been disruptive. Specifically in Guinea Conakry, you read some of the literature there, and the current head of state, is proud of the fact that he and his comrades in arms took over the country. And so again, that is clearly not apolitical. That's clearly, there's just their own motivation, and they, just have, and so they just have that to deal with. And so I'll leave that as my opening remarks.
All right. Thank you very much. Right. Okay. So, Dr. Machar. Dr. Machar, can you hear me? All right. So I sent a narrative, right, which is actually based on a research, right? A narrative in terms of the similarities and differences between Guinea and South Sudan election situation, written by Lassane Ouedraogo, right, who is currently a resident fellow at Center for Democracy and Development. He published a report, right, a situation analysis of the transition in Guinea Conakry. Actually, I reached out to him for him to come to the program today to have a conversation. But actually, he's having a wedding today, right, in Burkina Faso. So he couldn't join us. But what I want us to do is try to look at the similarities between what happened in Guinea, what is happening in Guinea, and what is happening also in South Sudan. Because if you read the last paragraph, it said in terms of Guinea, the 10-point plan includes developing a new constitution and adopting it through a popular referendum. These two steps will define several and other elements of the transition, including the constitution's organic laws and holding of local, legislative, and presidential elections. The draft constitution was scheduled for adoption by the National Transitional Council by the end of June 2023, but that deadline was missed. One reason for the delay may relate to funding. Many feel the Transitional Authority proposed budget to implement a roadmap, $600 million, is too high. So far, the government has announced the mobilization of only about $40 million of this amount. Now, the reason why I'm saying it is that funding is very, very important in terms of the transition, right? And from what we see, they've made a budget of $400 million, and they've all $600 million, and only $40 million has been released. They are expecting some funding from ECOWAS. I don't think ECOWAS has the funding. But does it mean that December 2024 for elections to be held. It's not feasible, or there could be a postponement of the election. Miss Madeline, you are on the ground over there. Do you think that the elections can be held this very December, taking into consideration the amount of money that is involved, and everyone is not able to go through the various timelines that they have?
Thank you. Yeah, it's a really good question, and I think that, from the point of view of the U.S. government, I mean, ADAPT is not about necessarily enforcing some sort of external deadline on a political transition, but it's about supporting and bolstering local communities and civil societies to better demand the transition and the representative governance institutions that they want. And so from the perspective of the U.S. government, when the Guinea transitional government announced its 24-month transition timeframe at the end of 2022, many Guineans saw this as a promise that the transitional government was making to them to deliver inclusive and durable democratic institutions in a timely and a transparent manner. And I think it's fair to say that many Guineans are beginning to feel that the transitional government is not living up to that promise. We in the U.S. government think the most constructive thing that we can do is to provide fora for the Guinea civil society to voice those concerns and to continue engage with their transitional government to proceed with this sense of urgency and transparency. Of course, budget is always a concern. That's part of the reason why the U.S. wanted to mobilize ADAPT to support Guinea. To be frank, we don't have $400 million sitting around somewhere waiting around. But we were able to really prioritize these efforts, and we were able to mobilize $12.5 million to support the transition and encourage others to do so as well. But there are many aspects to making a transition successful. Budget is only one of them, and there are so many others to think about and engage with when you try to answer your question. So I'll be interested to hear my fellow panelists as well, their thoughts on the situation.
Sure. All right. Thank you very much. Right. Lieutenant Corker, the reason why I brought this very issue, right? We are trying to make a comparison with what happened in South Sudan. With South Sudan, we were expecting IGAD, right, to be forthcoming with some sort of financial support to the country. We saw what happened with the revitalized Joint Monetary Evaluation Commission, the role that they played. Now, when you come back to Guinea, right, it has to be with ECOWAS. ECOWAS is not actually doing any kind of monetary and evaluation, right? Everything is left up to the transitional government. But they expect ECOWAS to come forth with some of the money. So how feasible, based on the amount of money involved, how much the government has been able to raise, and the expectations from ECOWAS? So I don't think ECOWAS has the resources from now up to the end of December to be able to support the Guinean government with this huge amount of money. So do you think that there's a likelihood that the elections is going to be postponed?
Well, I can speak to Guinea, and I don't have the background to compare and contrast with South Sudan. Only that I recognize that the two country and you're making the association with their REC, the regional economic community. I do know the ECOWAS quite well, and I do understand and know what you are referring to in the sense of ECOWAS and its capacity or lack thereof. And it's and that is also part of the challenge for that economic community, for that regional body and organization. And I would imagine that it's similar throughout the continent. And so specifically, what you're drawing to is that there is the ECOWAS there's no, if you will, overarching policy that's driving these political stabilization and transition. And so, yeah, not only is it the individual countries on their own trying to balance and be progressive and prosperous and successful and stabilized, but they don't but they cannot really look to ECOWAS for any really major significance. I have mentioned before that ECOWAS, is one of the more advanced regional facilities in the area of peace and security. And so it has specific frameworks, policy frameworks to guide these. However, in the Guinea situation, it's not applying the ECOWAS peace and security policy frameworks, if you will. And it is not applying other globally peace building or political stability frameworks either. And so if the ECOWAS really doesn't have its thumb on the pulse of how these transitions are progressing, then the countries like and the transition Guinea is off on its own to do things. Now, you mentioned that they had a budget of over $600 million to pursue some of what they're trying to do, but the budget is only as good as what we see in terms of the entire program cost. And so if there is no clear establishment delineation of a program, of the program cost, then the international community such as Madeline and others really don't know what they're kind of they are just kind of throwing their funds up against the wall and hoping to see what might stick. And so, with the funding, then you have to have a funding strategy. ECOWAS has a funding strategy. The AU would have a funding strategy on the way ahead. They would have a monitoring evaluation program to see how things are supposed to work. And then they also would have a financial management and controls established. And so all of this is written and it's well known in their the program design. And so and with that, going back, they said they made the assessment and they have their 10 pillars, if you will, in terms of how they're going to finally reach the transition. And then they kind of jump ahead and say, okay, now it's going to cost $600 million. And so that is, there's a lot of missteps there in terms of how they are kind of going through this thing in a very procedural orderly manner and kind of making sure that they're taking putting all the steps and pieces together to have a successful outcome. Right now, that is not apparent that they're doing anything in an orderly process. Over.
Right. Thank you very much. Now, let me come to you, Dr. Machar. All right. We are trying to draw some sort of similarity and differences between what is happening in South Sudan and what is happening in Guinea. Right? South Sudan, there's a willingness to hold elections, but it's still dependent on what? Foreign sponsorship or foreign funding. We know very well there is some sort of what? Donor fatigue. We see what is happening in Ukraine. We see what is happening in Sudan. We see what is happening in Gaza, right? But the funding is not coming. Can you draw some sort of similarity and differences between what is happening in South Sudan with with Guinea in terms of would the transitional government be able to hold the elections based on the fact that they want $600 million, but they would have been able to raise only $40 million. The same situation in South Sudan, where they also need the international support to be able to hold these elections this coming December. We can't hear it. Can you unmute yourself? Unmute yourself.
Thank you. Are you hearing me? So
Yeah,
sorry for
go ahead.
inconvenience. I was visited by one of the big names from the government, so without information that they were coming. So I had to talk with them on certain issue that they were actually taking my advice. So
Okay.
again, the situation, the two countries, South Sudan and Guinea, are extremely very different on the radar of superpower competitions. Here there is a donor and superpower politics on South Sudan. And that is not the case. There is a good willingness from the State Departments and other members of the international community on global politics when it comes to Guinea-Conakry, okay? Yes, there are similarities when it comes to military. Those two countries are run by the military administrations. But geography is also very important, trying to understand why the international community is motivated a little bit about what is going on in Guinea, in two areas. It is a coastal country. So the fact that the US can use its influence on maritime in Guinea is very, very important. That is the importance of geography to geostrategic interests of each country. And you remember in the early 2000s to mid 2000s, there were issues of drugs a lot in Guinea that threatened the Western security. That is not the case in South Sudan. So in South Sudan, the West is extremely perplexed about what is going on in the two Sudan. They thought they have resolved the issue of the North and the South in 2011, but they had actually forgotten about state formations, nation building, and state building in South Sudan. Those are not the case in Guinea. Why the West is also interested in Guinea is the fact of this military coup. Remember, the coup that took place in Guinea is one of those that triggered other dominoes series. The domino started in Conakry and is spread across West Africa. Okay, this is very, very important. So the U.S. want to actually show Mali and other West African countries that had the same military problem that the way that you guys are going is not the best way. The Ghanaian way is an important, and you know the West want to score too, want to disarm the rest of West Africa and other African using the Ghanaian model. You remember Guinea is a revolutionary society. Remember what had happened in 1958, which produced Secotru from 1958 until 84. And then you have General Lassana Conte from 1984 until 2008. Okay? There were changes there. And then you have Camara. And at the time of Camara, you saw a lot of Guineans coming out against the military. Okay? And then you have Alpha Conde, who became the beneficiaries, who brought democratization, first elected democratically in the history, but who became the very first person who actually changed the constitution to add more terms, which allowed in 2021 the military to overreact. So to me, Guinea is a revolutionary society, and the West is aware of that. Even if it is the least populated country, it is full of a lot of revolutionary mindsets, Pan-African oriented. Guinea, like Ghana, are very similar. But the current military in Conakry is not as well prepared to govern the country. Because remember, these were the bodyguard of the former president. And so to come back to South Sudan, South Sudan is in the process of nation building, and the metric of the state are not yet there. We do not have our international boundary demarcated very well. So that's one of those challenges. And when it comes to democratizations,
hold on, Dr. Machar. The question, what I want to know from you is that South Sudan presented timeline. They were given timeline period, but they were not able to meet the timelines, right? Guinea transitional government has also been able to come out with certain timelines. And these timelines all have to deal with funding, international funding. So if they are not able to get the international funding, does it mean that the election would be postponed?
But you have to understand that in Guinea, there's no civil war in Guinea. That's one. So the timeline can be met in Guinea, okay? You can just arrange the transitions. There are no competing warring parties in Guinea, which is the case in South Sudan. The warring parties that waged the war from 2013 until 2018, some of them do not want election because election actually can rob them of their new gained power. So that is not the case in Guinea, okay? And also the international community has a vested interest in South Sudan, okay? Certain vested interests that they want certain party to the peace agreement to be the one taking over. In Guinea is a pure transition that the international community is somehow more neutral. They want to use it as a pilot examples of democratization in the region so that they can tell those in Mali, Niamey, Gabon, that the road that you have taken is wrong. And France is actually aligning its interest with that of the United States. It is French that are telling the American to actually be more lenient and more accommodative to the military transitions to democracy in Guinea. This is not the case in South Sudan. So it's not even a question of money.
Let me follow up with Madeline briefly, right? She is not very conversant with what is happening in South Sudan. I just want to give you a little background. In the case of South Sudan, we have IGAD, right, involved over there. They have what they call what Joint Monitoring and Evaluation Commission. We tend to monitor what happens in South Sudan in terms of meeting various timelines, right? That is what is happening in South Sudan. But when you come to the situation in Guinea, which has to do with ECOWAS is not doing any kind of monitoring and evaluation in terms of the timelines that the transitional government is giving its own self. So the transitional government is dealing with its own self based on its own timeline without any kind of monitoring and evaluation. So based on that, since they do not have the funding, right, can they meet the deadline, right, by December? If you look at what they have, which is $60 million and $400 million, that's a huge gap. And I don't think that ECOWAS has some money stuck somewhere to be able to give to them. So do you think there's the likelihood that this election will be postponed, just like it's going to be done in South Sudan?
No, it's a really good question, and you're absolutely right that the 24-month time frame, that was, well, I mentioned, many Guineans saw it as a promise that the transitional government was making to them, and but it was also a promise, more literally, an agreement between the transitional government and ECOWAS. And so ECOWAS needs to be the actor that is that is continuing to engage on the agreement and following up and asking questions and things. And to a certain extent, there's not a role for the U.S. government in there because it is an agreement between two West African partners, between the transitional government and ECOWAS. And so it will be very challenging for the transition to play out as the agreement says, if both parties to the agreement are not continually engaged through that process. Yes, I think that would be very challenging.
Yeah, thank you.
Let me just interject that up here.
Yeah, go ahead.
The reason why, the example of Guinea is very, very important. It is ECOWAS and the military. But also the military has to be very, very careful, as I just put it before. Guinea is a revolutionary society within the army. If the army fails to hold or to stick to 2024 December, the military can actually strike within in Guinea. You must remember that, okay? So it's a revolutionary society. Why was assassination attempt against Camara? Was the violation what he did in 2008? So this is not true in the context of South Sudan, okay? Once you look at that, it is in South Sudan there are groups within the government who are opposed to election because they want to make sure that the status quo is maintained. Mamadi and his other boys want to make sure that there's a transition so that they are not held accountable later on for whatever might happen. Because you remember the persecution of Kamara and other people who have come before him. So Guinea has a history there. And also the United States is also very interested through the French influence, okay? And through what had happened in West Africa. So those are dichotomy that actually makes the Guinean case more unique and exceptional compared to our case in South Sudan. And you have to look at the region too, because the region is very volatile here. Also, the Mano regions is also very, very volatile. But the elections in Liberia last year actually is paving some ways, for the first time for the transition to happen successfully. 3 times right now from Sirleaf to George to this current president. So you are seeing the trend a little bit in the regions and up and down a little bit, which is not chaotic in Sierra Leone. Those are preparing the ground for Guinea, for what is going on in Guinea. So I might not be cocksure enough, but I'm certain that there are certainty for election to go on.
All right, thank you. Let me come to you, Let me come to you. Madeline make a very interesting statement that the Guinean public are a little bit skeptical of your talking about only 4 months period, right? To do so many things. You are going to what? Set up a new constitution, right? You are going to do what? A census, right? So these are so many things to be done within 24 months period. And secondly, they do not have the resources. They are going to be dependent on ECOWAS. So do you see the situation, even though is making the argument, it's a revolutionary society, and if the military is not able to meet those deadlines, right, it could lead to what? A revolution again. Do you agree? They can't have it all. That we want an election in 24 months, and at the same time we don't have the resources.
So I think to underscore what everyone has been pushing, I clearly the ECOWAS and Guinea are joined, and they're joined to try to bring about a transition. However, the means for that transition are only in skeletal form, if you will. Let's say the transition government says, well, these are our 10 objectives. And as Madeline says, yeah, then the onus is on ECOWAS to kind of set up set up this program to achieve these outcomes. I think everyone would say that what they have said is to a large extent reasonable, but the problem is in the details. And so if there are no details, then really no one knows how things are progressing. And if you don't know how things are progressing, then you don't have any anticipation of an outcome. So they have certainly, they have lines of effort. We don't know, in the CSO and USAID and others business, and also with UNDP and the development community, they have clear plans and programs and how to do this. They have, not only the objectives, but with the objectives, they talk in terms of activities. What are the activities? They talks of the activities producing, delivering certain outputs and outcomes, and so forth. So you methodically kind of get to your result. You achieve your objective. But if you don't have that detail, then it's really difficult to say how things are going. At this pace, and also with the history of Guinea, I was there in 2010 when Dadis Camara was the assassination attempt, and we did the initial security sector evaluation at that time, and I'm familiar with the context. And they have, and I do know that they just did not have the same legacy, if you will, that is of a Senegal or of a Cote d'Ivoire or of a Ghana or otherwise. Guinea was the country that kind of repelled the French, back at independence, and they suffered because of it. Knowing the French and Francophone Africa, the French have not been making a lot of overtures into Guinea, and they have, for the most part, kind of left well enough alone. And when they closed the door on them, they did so in a very abrupt manner. And so, that said, also then with how French has lost its influence in West Africa, I don't really know that French is having a major impact in the region. Now, getting back to the transition and the prospects of another, I just think I don't think that there's no reason for the leadership in Guinea to relinquish power. And also there's no evidence that they will do so, even given the 24-month agreement with ECOWAS. I just think it's an opportunity to kind of buy time, and kind of just wait for the next decision point to come around, and then have ECOWAS renegotiate for another period, if you will. So they may extend it beyond this. But that's again, if you have, it is, no one really knows how things are progressing. The other thing that Matt and others may know or not at that end is to who are leading these pillars, if you will. And so if there are 10 pillars, then there potentially are government leads for them, and then with that pillar leader, that person has a plan on what they're trying to accomplish. But I from what I have seen, I haven't seen very much of it. And even with the 10 elements, as I understand the document that's extracted from, is close hold, if you will. So again, that's their prerogative to do. But if they want help, they would be as transparent as they possibly could be. Over.
All right, thank you very much. I wanted us to take a look at the technical assessment of the NDI, right? But Mr. Komovi was one of the delegation, was part of the delegation that met the government. But since it's not there, it's not here yet, I want us to hold on to that and go to that initiative, right? So let's go back to that initiative. So we can discuss it, try to buy some time whether Mr. Kofi Komovi will join us. So on November 8, 2023, on the U.S. Department of State website, a press statement by Matthew Miller, department spokesperson for the department, titled Announcement of ADAPT Initiative in Guinea. So there was a statement that was read. A statement was written over there. So let's come to you, Madeleine. Can you explain to us the ADAPT Initiative and why did the U.S. Department of State choose Guinea, right? We have Guinea, a coup d'etat happened over there. We have Mali, we have Guinea, we have Burkina Faso and Niger. Why specifically Guinea?
Sure, definitely. Yeah, happy to provide a little more context on ADAPT in general, and then Guinea as the pilot case. It was in President Biden's national security strategy where the U.S. was underscored that our commitment to countering democratic backsliding and pressing for these timely progress on transitions to democratic rule. And so the African Democracy and Political Transitions Initiative, ADAPT, which was announced by President Biden at the Africa Leaders Summit in December 2022. This represents a high-level effort to advance this objective and to enable the U.S. government to more effectively partner with regional bodies, with governments, and with civil society to support successful democratic transitions in Africa. And so ADAPT is really designed to fill a gap in the U.S. government response to support for political transitions in sub-Saharan Africa. So it's drawing from lessons from the past. ADAPT really attempts to solve kind of this perennial challenge that U.S. embassies are often overstretched and understaffed and under-resourced to meet the tasks that are presented by a complex political transition, which can come on quite suddenly. So through ADAPT, the U.S. government would surge experts to the field to work with the U.S. Embassy and the USAID mission to support the transition tasks. It would fund specific programming to assist regional bodies, governments, and of course, civil society to develop these credible transition plans, to develop milestones, including things like national dialogues, censuses, building voter registrations, and support to constitutional reform. And then ADAPT was also designed to leverage U.S. diplomatic and convening power to reinforce all this progress and to really rally and coordinate the external partners and kind of secure political commitments from local actors, regional actors, and press for these credible, inclusive transitions. And so in Guinea, it's a good question of how did Guinea become, why was Guinea selected? Unfortunately, because ADAPT is such an interagency initiative, there were so many stakeholders involved in making that decision process, and I was not privy to those conversations. So I don't really know, I can't provide a well-informed answer to that question. I can speak, in my view about why I believe that Guinea is a strong candidate for ADAPT. And for me, it comes down to kind of three aspects. The first is Guinea's growing importance to U.S. policy in Africa. Guinea was selected in 2021 prior to the coup, but to be a priority country for the implementation of the administration's strategy to prevent conflict and promote stability, which is a new initiative. And so this growing importance of Guinea in U.S. foreign policy, made it a strong case for ADAPT support. But also because the U.S. Embassy here was very much in need of this type of surge support that ADAPT offers to be able to respond quickly to the situation. But then most importantly, to me, it seems
Attention embassy, attention embassy. This is main security guard at post 1 conducting an after-hours check. The time is now 15.
Very sorry about that. I'm speaking from our embassy right now, and they were giving an announcement over the loudspeaker. Kind of cut into my most important part, which is again just this from the legacy of 1958 through to today, this strong legacy of the Guinean people, fighting for the government they want. They make really good partners in this kind of initiative. I have not focused on the situations in Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger, so I wish I could give a more comparative answer. But in my reflection, this is why Guinea makes a strong case for ADAPT.
All right, thank you very much. Let me come to Lieutenant Parker briefly, right? If you listen to Madeleine, she was talking about the initiative was actually what put in place before the coup d'etat, right? Now, we know about the Global Fragility Act, all right? Does it mean that Guinea was not recognized as one of those fragile countries in the coastal West African sub-regions, right, to be placed under the GFA, the Global Fragility Act. Is that what it means? That the US did not anticipate that Guinea was a fragile state that could, right, could reverse or backslide to what? To military rule.
No, that's not what that's not what it infers or states outright. In fact, almost the opposite. And so if you have and by the opposite, even we may not, well, we do see Guinea in the Global Fragility Act. You might recall, and the listeners might recall, that Guinea is in fact one of the countries, excuse me, in the U.S. Strategy to prevent conflict and promote stability. And so those were the DC and the White House, selected, for that five coastal West African countries to pursue the conflict prevention and promotion of stability. So Guinea, and then you have Togo and Benin and Cote d'Ivoire. And maybe I think it's Ghana, maybe the fifth.
Yeah, there's Ghana, yeah.
And Ghana. So no, 100%, Guinea was in there, and it is in there. And so in essence, it benefits from two areas in the White House strategy on sub-Saharan Africa, the ADAPT initiative being the first one for that one, and then also being the fuller strategy to promote stability and prevent conflict and promote stability. And those are the big sub-Saharan Africa is very well resourced, whereas I'm not sure, I don't know, I don't estimate that the ADAPT is on that level. And I think that my understanding is that at the national security staff level, at IPC, interagency policy committee, the interagency leaders kind of get together and say, okay, well, let's put a few names out there. And I suspect one of the members proposed Guinea, and the others, gave their reasons why or why not they would consent, and ultimately kind of landed on Guinea. I think that again, I think I think the folks in Washington may have a stronger sense of a positive outcome than I do. Having knowing Guinea the way I do, and knowing the militaries throughout the region, I don't foresee again the leaders, the comrades at arms, as they use their own terms, are as Professor Machar say, yeah, that's a revolutionary state, and so that culture is deeply ingrained, maybe more so than in other countries in the region. There is so it will be hard for that leadership to extract itself from the political landscape. At the moment, it is part of the fabric.
All right, thank you very much. We'll come to you, Madeline, later, but let me go briefly to Professor Machar. Right now, if you observe, Guinea, Niger, Burkina Faso, Mali, these were all Francophone countries. They were colonized by the French, right? But if you look at the coup that happened in Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger, they formed an alliance to break away from ECOWAS. But Guinea still stayed the course to stay in ECOWAS and to go through that transitional period. What could have informed the transitional government decision to stay in ECOWAS instead of moving away from ECOWAS, but to go through the transitional government to return the country back to what civilian rule? What could have informed the decision instead of Only a part of the three other Francophone countries.
Two reasons. It was because Guinea, as I qualified it as a revolutionary society, the 1958 revolutions had made Guinea-Conakry more a Pan-African state. The other states were in the sphere of influence of France, tutelage, until 2000s, when those military coups occur, except the case of Mali, okay? Except the case of Mali. So the military takeover in 2021 in Guinea was not actually anti-France, nor anti-the United States, nor anti-anyone. It was actually geared to a domestic resolution of their own problems. But the military coups that took place in those countries were actually anti-French, okay? And the citizens of those countries saw ECOWAS as a compromise regional organization that was about to be used by France and the United States to actually turns the will of the people. But in Guinea, there was no anti-foreign forces, including ECOWAS. So ECOWAS is not seen in Guinea as a compromise organization. Are you guys hearing me?
Yeah, we're listening. Yeah, we are listening to you. Yeah.
Yeah. So ECOWAS, in the eyes of Ghanaians, is not a compromise organization. But in the eyes of Malians and Burkinabe and Nigerians and Gabonese, is a compromise organization because France is trying to use it to upset the gain of those military regime taken over in those societies. So those societies, I think France and other Westerners do not want the recurrence of 1958, which later on became true in 1980 with Sankara, okay? The unique case in all these cases right now are only two. Mali too is a revolutionary society dating back to when it was West Sudan. So it was an ally of Nkrumah and Sékou Touré, okay? And then Sankara becomes a student of both Sékou Touré and Nkrumah, okay? And Keita in Mali. But Niger always and Gabon has been within the core sphere of influence like Côte d'Ivoire. So now, the reason why ECOWAS is extremely aiding in those countries is because it is a compromise organizations in the eyes of those citizens. And once you look at the perceptions of ECOWAS among those the citizens of those countries, you are more likely to find out that they are favoring Nigerian civil citizens and more anti-Nigerian states, because Nigerian state was about to be used by the West to go it alone using ECOWAS to actually take out the military administration in Niger. But the Nigerian public refused, okay? Remember, in historical context, once you look, read Robert Young's books, Nigeria, like Kenya, Ivory Coast, was a conservative regime. It's one of those alignment countries that was actually a pro-Western camp, but maintained its African liberation spirits by hosting the ANC, ZANU-PF, and others. So that it appeared in Africa, it is actually a Pan-African state, and which is true. You read that also in Abagurin books about Nigeria. But on the issue of the coup in those three African states, Mali, Burkina Faso, Niger, Nigerian citizens came out outright more Pan-African and opposed to their own government, their own state, and also the ECOWAS. So ECOWAS backed down. So ECOWAS is not opposed or is not seen as a foreign tool in Guinea, but it is seen as a foreign tool in those countries. Those are the differences.
All right, thank you. Let's come back to Madeleine, right? So the transition was an agreement between the transitional government and ECOWAS, but the ADAPT initiative is more or less in terms of developing civil society. Has the U.S. government or has the ANAS initiative, have they made any outreach to ECOWAS in terms of how they are going to monitor what the transitional government is doing? Have you made any kind of outreach to ECOWAS, even though the agreement was between ECOWAS and the transitional government?
Yeah, it's a really good question, because as I can't remember if I've gotten to this part, but yeah, as ADAPT does have kind of two lines of effort. It has the programmatic lines of effort and the diplomatic lines of effort. So that's what it has this interagency effect, and trying to make sure that the U.S. government's programs and its diplomacy are aligned to support the transition as strongly as possible. And so, as you mentioned, on the programmatic side, a lot of the funding is to support kind of the engagement of civil society, the advancements of some of the 10 steps. We've obligated $3 million to support the transition electoral processes, including helping build a new biometric based voter roll, and helping with the constitutional constitutional drafting. We also have $1 million for citizen observation of the elections when they do take place, and several other initiatives. But then on the other hand is the diplomatic efforts. And so the U.S. is engaging at all levels of the interagency with these different stakeholders, both bilateral and the multilateral institutions, ECOWAS included, to engage routinely. How are we going to use our diplomatic tools to support the transition and to amplify the voices of the Guinean people? So just one example of this is the high-level visit by the Deputy Assistant Secretary of State Michael Heath in January, when he met with many Guinean stakeholders here, but was also in country, and our ambassador engages also with ECOWAS representation here in Guinea, and then we have our interagency colleagues in DC. So this is definitely a part of how ADAPT is envisioned to work.
Right. Let me follow. Let's assume that the transitional government is not able to meet the deadline, the timelines for the December 2024 elections, right? What would the ADAPT initiative, what would happen to it? Would the US still continue with it, or there's going to be cutting of ties? We've seen situations like that.
So that is not how ADAPT is envisioned. Of course, you never know what predicting the future is impossible depending on the context. But actually, ADAPT is designed to last beyond even the 24-month transition, which made people a little nervous when we announced it, because they were saying, "Are you anticipating an extension of the timeline?" That's not what we meant to do. So ADAPT was announced in October. It was announced in October of 2023, and will go through the end of 2025. Is where the fund, the amount that the funds are obligated for. But this was more about responding to requests we've had in the past to extend U.S. engagement in the context of delicate transitions and elections beyond election day. That often the support dries up very quickly after elections, and is not there to stick around and kind of help in the follow-on to elections. And so we are a bit don't have to answer this question, because it was always envisioned to be a before, or during transition, during elections, after elections holistic approach. And so, as a simple answer to your question, it's not that it would dry up like this at all. That's not to say that the intent would be that we were anticipating or would advocate for delays in that regard. But it is flexible in that way, and in that way attempting to be a bit new in how the U.S. is able to engage in these transition contexts, because hopefully I'm not the first person to say we haven't been the most flexible and adaptable in the past.
All right, so let me go to Tenta Cook, and I'll come back to you. Well, we are political observers of Guinea, right? And look at what has happened on the continent. We know, as political observers, we know very well that Guinea will not be able to meet the deadline based on financial resources, right? But we are hearing from Madeline that the US is going to be a little bit more flexible. I think that's a positive thing to hear from her, that the US will be very, very positive in terms of the program going beyond 2025. What do you have to say to that?
I couldn't agree more, and so that's good news to to hear that flexibility, and probably that's music to the ears of the people of Guinea. But as Madeline has already said, is that a lot of times after these periods and let's even say they did have an election and it was successful, there's still some support and assistance needed to follow through so that things kind of have a soft landing. So hats off, if you will, to CSO and the USG for this flexibility in the ADAPT initiative. Well, I guess also I would turn to Madeline to see to what extent ADAPT does in fact interact with what we were also addressing, and that is with the U.S. strategy to prevent conflict and promote stability.
All right, thank you very much. Dr. Marcel, do you have anything to say briefly?
On U.S. strategy?
Yeah, in terms of the good news, you are hearing that the U.S. is going to be a little bit more flexible, right? If the transitional government is not able to meet their own deadline of December 2024 of holding elections, the U.S. program with the ADAPT initiative will still continue. Because in the situation with South Sudan, we know that there are calls for sanctions to be imposed on the Sudanese government because of their failure to meet various timelines.
Yes. With flexibility of elections in Guinea, it's more welcomes because the United States want to actually disprove the other countries that are not following the democratic path. Okay. Second, Guinea has more options. The playing field is not how it used to be. There are also other models of governance in the world. So democratic model is not the only model of governance. And I think this is where Africans sometimes are falling short. We thought at the end of the Cold War, there was going to be the second liberation. And that second liberation is not well understood intellectually in Africa. We did not have another Pan-Africanese Congress to evaluate from independence until the chaos that happened in 1960, 1970, 1980s, and 1990s with structural adjustment. And what are the model of governance that we want? We have been with the West for 500 years for some other countries, such as Congo, Angola, and some of the coastal African countries. But our interaction with the West did not actually lead to any type of development, whether Western capitalism was imported so that we actually own it, or Western governance were adapted through colonizations or in post-colonial Africa. Nothing worked from the West. So the United States, if it actually sticks with its program of flexibility, that would be actually a great hallelujah moment. It has to accommodate some of these delicate realities that African countries are facing. The problem that I referenced last time, the problem of political stability for South Sudan, economic development for Guinea, okay, and rule of law, okay? Those are not reflected very well in Africa. How can you have a democratic elections when the level of poverty is extremely very high? And people thought, when there's democracy, there's going to be economic development, which is totally very different. Okay, those things are not well sorted out sometimes in many African contexts. And that's why, with whole election and the Democrat of yesterday became the dictators of today. And look at Alpha Conde. Why did he actually amend the constitution in the first place? And look at Macky Sall. And this is where the differences in society come in. The Senegalese were resisting civil society. And they were very adamant, trying to force the state to actually stick to the constitution. Macky Sall, who was the same person who was opposed to President Wade, when President Wade was about to create a third term. Why was it actually preferable for him to do that? and it was unfavorable way to do that. Okay, look at the contradiction, but the differences are the type of society where we are talking about this democratization and the democratization. In South Sudan, it is still extremely militarized society. Guinea is not a militarized society. Okay, there are few guns in civil hands in Guinea case. Almost everyone is armed to TCL in South Sudan. Even the government is less armed than the population. So democratization in South Sudan is less likely to happen because we are a post-independent society, a post-conflict society, a society that got its independence from a neighboring state that want to destabilize it. But hey, don't always dance in the graveyard of a dead man. You can actually fall in, and that what had happened in the north. North is now more unstable compared to the south.
All right,
okay?
all right, all right. Thank you very much. Let's go to the last narrative on Guinea's economic prospects, right? So the African CEO Forum on February 23rd, 2024, had a digital event that invests in Guinea, specifically designed for international investors, leaders of multinational companies, financing institutions, African business executives. But I gave you a narrative of what really happened, right? Lieutenant Parker, you actually sent me that event, right, in terms of the prospects that Guinea has. Do you think that the government, the current transitional government, right, understands the prospect of this country, and they will be able to stick with a timetable to hold elections by 2024 to be able to attract these investors to come to the country in terms of development?
So I think they will. But they think that business people are pragmatic, and so if they have an invitation to visit the country and to explore opportunities, they're going to take the invitation. I don't know that those, particularly with the Africa CEO Forum, I don't know that they're going to kind of wait for a particular outcome of the election. Should one happen and it's successful, that's definitely kind of going to give them an open door to kind of to walk through and to pursue their the business prospects. If they don't have the outcome, I still think that there will with the natural resources in the country are there and available. And so I think that they will always have suitors, and I think this is likewise that what you're seeing in Niger, and what they're able to do and what they're able to extract. I believe it's with uranium or otherwise, and in fact, they have been so successful with mining in Niger that it has been a boost to their economy, and they're projecting greater results over time. So and also so for Guinea and for its resources. I think the good news, the positive news on this side again was that they were featured at the Africa CEOs Forum, and so that kind of speaks quite well of their what they're able to do. So there's another angle to it as well, and that is to what extent the government can can work with the business and the finance community. And so that will likewise with its, and if it's working with ECOWAS is and the example, then that kind of speaks for itself as well. And so and more, as nations mature and evolve in 2024, they have to they if they don't already know, kind of they have an awakening, saying no, these people are serious people, serious business, serious investigators, serious prospectors, and so we need to kind of raise our game and our play in it. And so that is, and I think if with all of the changes and transitions throughout the Sahel and then down on the coast of Guinea. I think this is what they're seeing is that there the proverbial boy, there is another world out there, and so this is there's a lot of potential, and I think that's the good news of it. I think as Professor Bashar did address, Guinea did not have any. They were not anti anyone. Well, the others were anti, Mali and Burkina Faso and Niger. Yeah, they were anti-French, and part of the reason that they were anti-French is simply between the comportment of the French to these people, and it wasn't very very pretty. Even more recently, when the U.S. As we refer to as high level delegation kind of went and visited in Niger to try to resolve, they were kind of booted, and they were booted because to make a long story short, they treated the transitional government in Niger, Niamey, with disrespect. And so even the leadership in Niger said, boy, they were, these people were quite condescending, kind of coming into our capital. And so this is no way to kind of win friends, and we're trying, and as we're doing this, and that is looking at both sides for a long time. The sides are always talking at each other and to each other, but not with each other. And so and that's we are the U.S. because it's strong partnership and core partnership with France kind of go is walking in lockstep with the French. But if you walk in lockstep with the French in Francophone Africa, that is probably doing the U.S. more harm than good. So again, to kind of conclude on this, whether with the Africa CEO forums and its focus on Guinea and Guinea's natural resources, that's a good move. And hopefully the Ghanaian leadership and the Ghanaian people kind of can rise to the occasion and make the best of it.
Sure, thank you very much. Right. So Madeleine, you are on the ground over there, right? If you look into the Biden administration strategic objective, right, in the post-COVID stabilization, right? They're talking about trying to stabilize some of these countries. Do you see any movement in terms of progress of American companies or foreign direct investment coming into Guinea based on what the article is saying, that Guinea has good prospects? It's that's an expected growth rate of 5.6% in 2024. Do you see anything happening on the ground in terms of American companies coming into the country?
Unfortunately, you're talking to the wrong person with that question. Since I'm even though I'm here and in the embassy, I'm really not tracking that level of things. At the top level, I see, as Lieutenant said, I see interest and visits and continued interest, and I do think Guinea will always have some of that because of the wealth of resources it has to kind of offer the world. I am not a business person, but if I were making a business decision, I do, I would act cautiously around a country whose constitution is been suspended, right? Because like you do want some sort of rule of law and to protect yourself as a person doing business in that country. And so I would imagine there would be kind of this balance between in an investor interest between that there's a lot to be interested in and a lot to be cautious of. But I really don't know because it's not I'm speaking very much as a layperson on both those issues.
All right, thank you. Let's come back to Dr. Masha. What do you think should be the way forward for the transitional government in terms of these positive outlook economically, right, on the country? What do you think the transitional government should be focused on doing? We can't hear you. Unmute yourself.
In Guinea, there are positive strengths. One, there's no external threat that want to undo the regime that came to power in 2021. They just want a smooth transitions, and there are now a lot of human rights violations that had actually been heaped on it that would actually create a threat to exit. So if I were those boys in power right now, I will just be looking for really, really very good intellectuals to advise me. Okay, to advise me, because in my neighborhood, I'm not so much opposed by anyone, but everyone has some interest for me to succeed. That's number one. Number two is the really economic models that the country want to adopt, because again, the level of education that can attract certain level of investment seem to be lacking in most countries in Africa. Okay, so I will use this transition as a great period in a way that I will actually have a social contract with those powerful countries to support certain level of education, whereby I give intellectuals who are well exposed and understanding, so that they advise me and the society on type of model education that has to be adopted for future investment and for future economic development. The same thing that we saw among the Asian tigers. It was not just education per se, but what type of education a society want to do what with it. Those things are now still very lacking. But when you are talking of that good economic goodwill, it is only Guinean, Nigerian, Kenyan, Zimbabwean, Rwandan, to some extent Ethiopian, and more likely Egyptian that can fit that models. The type of economic investment prosperity that we are seeing with the U.S. business interest is still going to be extractive industry, rent-seeking type of models. And that has always been a source of instability across Africa. You know, that prop up certain class that has a strong taste and preference of foreign produced goods, but they do not have the skill and capacity that is needed actually to transition the country away from economic problems that had always invited instability. So again, Guinea has a goodwill internationally and also internally. People want to transition, but how are they going to transition with poor education that has not actually prepared the public or the society for development? What we see in Senegal is totally different, because the gain of education since 1960s have actually changed the society. What they cannot gain with the education in their own country, they becomes the largest international civil workforce, the Senegalese. So the education is actually not giving them so much at home, but at the same time, it is actually creating a lot of employment for them outside. And out of that, they send in a lot of remittance from the international expatriates, those who are working for the United Nations. Senegal is one of the countries with the largest expatriates. And why? It is because of the model education, that if you cannot transition here at home with that education, it can actually have you to work internationally, and we can actually gain from that. The money that you will send for yourself to come and build, the taxation that comes with it, the domestic investment from the Senegalese, those are the domestic sources of stability in Senegal. And like other African countries, including my own, which I think will take close to 30 years for us to be actually where other African countries are. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much. I think time is fast spent. Let's come to you briefly, right, in terms of your closing remarks. Lieutenant Corker, you know the region very, very well. You know the countries in that region. And you, given your background, if you were advising the TCN, which is headed by Domboya, right, what would you be telling him, given the economic prospects, right, that has been forecasted for the country? And taking into consideration, Madeline making the argument that because there's a suspension of the constitution, investors should be very, very cautious. What will you be telling the transitional government to do going forward to be able to attract all these investments into the country?
The first thing I would do is I would make a very strong pitch to restore civilian leadership. And properly kind of democratically elected leadership. And so, but it doesn't necessarily have to be democratic right now, but civilian leadership. So and so that again, so that's the first thing is to keep that in mind. Second is with, as Professor Mashar kind of recognized, that the tremendous gains from education. And so now, while you cannot kind of spread any kind of fairy dust and raise the level of education in Guinea overnight, what you can do is there are a lot of very talented, highly educated Guineans both in Guinea and worldwide. And so I that's kind of what we would consider as doing a search for the top talent to come in to take over some of the governmental positions, and with first and foremost kind of finance and economics. That is that beyond a shadow of a doubt, that's really kind of what has saved Cote d'Ivoire over the past since the change of government there in 2011, 2012, 2010, 11 timeframe. President Ouattara, I mean, heck, he has he has made kind of the economy his personal interest number one, simply because his substantial background in it. And so Cote d'Ivoire is flourishing, and likewise the others can flourish. And those are the types of people that they need to make an outreach to. Is President Ouattara, have a sit down and and have someone for mentoring in getting the Ghanaian economy back up to speed. I do have to go back to as you said, regionally, and with Senegal and also the Francophone countries in the Sahel area. And the big difference in Senegal that was not the same in Mali, Burkina Faso, and Mali, and Niger, is this: when we let Senegal a hand in 2000. We did more than lend Senegal a hand. We became a Senegal's partner, a formal official partner. And so we had not become, the U.S. had not become a formal official partner in those other Francophone countries. And so in doing so, that in effect, to me, in my impression, kind of released some of the pressure off of Senegal to rely, to a great extent, on France, as the other countries have had to do so since that period. And so those relations over time just became too onerous, because they did not have any other release valve. And so folks are looking in. We've talked before about different narratives on what's going on and how partners are coming and going throughout the Sahel. And so that's possibly what some of these other countries are looking for. They are looking for reliable partners. And so so they have already concluded that the government of France is not that one. And to this point, no one else has stepped in. And so then some say, well, by default, others are kind of filling the vacuum, i.e., Russia or China or even Islamists, and so on and so forth. And so that it was, in my experience, kind of one of the differences, and is the U.S. position in Senegal, and why it has remained stable. And again, it was, I know, with Macky Sall, he knows the history as well as anyone else does, and so he knew what was at stake with the stability of that country and its impact throughout. So so what the advice to the government is to is to restore civilian leadership. In a democracy, it's called civilian control of the military. And so if there are democratic military folks, then they understand, and they know the current commander. He's been through enough U.S. Programs to understand and respect and appreciate the U.S. model, and not that it's perfect, but he understands civilian control of the military. The second is the key experts, the leading experts, Ghanaians in some of these fields. And so they should be, I would have high confidence that they would be able to deliver on it. And then the last, and I know one of the goals of this is administrative reform, and that's that kind of throughout West Africa. They are many. They're going to be transitioning countries in many of these areas for a long time, and so those are this administrative review is pretty common. So that's what I would offer over.
All right, thank you very much for your closing remarks. Let's come back to you, Madeline, right? You had Lieutenant Adcock talking about reliable partner, right? You made it clear that the U.S. may be probably be a little bit flexible with the ADAPT initiative. Could you say that the U.S. will become a reliable partner to send signals to the other countries in the region that, hey, this time the U.S. is serious and the U.S. want to make sure that these countries transition into the democratic dispensation?
Yes, I think that and this speaks a little bit to the question about the links with the Global Fragility Act and the strategy to prevent conflict and promote stability. That strategy is all about partnership and partnering with these countries that we've identified as to be strong partners in the kind of fight to combat fragility globally and promote stability. And so we want that partner back in Guinea. It's very difficult for the U.S. government, I'm sure you're aware, to build a long-lasting partnership with a transitional government. And so I would agree that the strongest action that can be taken is to transition with a balance of durability and inclusive. You want it to result in strong, durable institutions, but definitely approach the transition with a sense of urgency and be working towards ending the transitional arrangement and having a more kind of firm constitutionally legitimate elected government. Yes, the choice of Guinea as a partner for the SPCPS, the strategy to prevent conflict and promote stability, it was definitely because the U.S. seeks stronger partnership here. That we'd like to continue to build.
All right, thank you very much. Let's come to you, Machar. Right, for the last word, the U.S. has been a reliable partner for South Sudan, right? So, do you see the same situation, right? In the case of the Guineans, if they do the right thing, they are able to transition to a civilian democratic constitutional government. The U.S. is going to be there by their side, compared to what is happening in the South Sudan, where we don't have the political will or the part of the leaders. You see something different happening in Guinea. Unmute yourself.
It is uncertain that election is more likely to take place in December in South Sudan because of different reasons. Internally, there are groups within the government that do not want the elections because they want to remain and maintain the status quo under the agreement. Because you remember what we used to hear from Professor Mansa about the Asian monks. They are supposed to be vegetarian, but when they taste meat, it is really, really very difficult for them to be vegetarian. This is our case in South Sudan. Those who have actually test power using wrong mechanisms, using emotion that we want peace in South Sudan, hoping that when they come to power, they will be Democrat. They are only Democrat when they are rebelling, but when they assume the leadership, no, I don't want. because of this, keeping always moving the goalposts. That is our problem. And the US also had caught itself in the web of those who were using democratization and human rights as if when they come to power, they will be Democrat. Now the US is learning through hard way in South Sudan, okay? And the issue of finance is also something that have to be reckoned with. Yes, South Sudan has its own resources, but these resources are not managed in a way that we can actually budget for our own elections. Yes, we can actually pledge some things, but we need some international goodwills, but that's not forthcoming. So this is going to make election possibility very, very, very difficult. What I'm seeing in South Sudan is for this group to agree again for another transition. But for how long are we going to govern the country based on transition? That is on the side of South Sudan. Because Guinea is blessed because it does not have external threats on its sovereignty. And the coup that took place in 2015 or 2021 was an internal driven coup. It was not external driven coup, okay? So, which differentiated from others. The others were actually internal driven coup opposed to the French. So to some, this is the first really independent from France since 1960s, at least in the case of Niger, because the other two, Mali and Burkina Faso, have always produced radical anti-French, but they have always been compromised from within. The case of Sankara, and also what had happened in 1990s with democratization that was actually blowing across Africa. And Mali was one of those countries that was held highly, but because of poverty and the overthrow of Gaddafi, things fall apart. And the emerging of Islam in the Sahel region, and the poverty that comes from the immigrants that were actually displaced from working in Libya, coming back home. And they have family to feed. So, and the state was unable to provide. And then the issue of climate change. These are actually the realities that actually fuels the military takeover. So they are not entirely anti-French. Anti-French coupled with several economics and security problems in the Sahel region, of which Guinea is not has no problem on that. And I'm glad that Colonel Tats actually mentioned the case of Ivory Coast. And I think if U.S. flexibility is very important, you need to also talk to people like Ouattara. Don't extend your term limit again, because you are sending a wrong message to the region. You came through military violence in 2010 or 2011, and you have been extending your term limit. So it is not what is good for African, it is what is good for the West. And when West talk of democracy, it is the democracy that fit its interest in the region, not the one that fitted the African interest in the region. And if elections have to be held today, fair and free, don't be surprised that Bagbo can win back. Yes, Bagbo can win back.
All right.
The major.
All right. On this note, time is fast spent. So on this note, we come to the end of another Sankofa African series. Let me say a big thank you to Lieutenant Akoka from Washington, D.C., Dr. Machar from Juba, South Sudan, and Madeleine Batoria coming all the way from Guinea Conakry, right? We thank you. It's rather unfortunate that we couldn't have Kumobi coming around, but we thank you for your time and the effort to join us this Friday, April 5th, 2024, and we hope to come to you next week again with another series on the election situation on the African continent. On this note, we say, enjoy the rest of your weekend. Coming from me, from Washington, D.C. Enjoy the rest of your weekend, and goodbye.